banned from speaking. Then they needed my voice, 1876. They told her to keep quiet, because her vowels were too foreign for their ears. In a town that measured worth by who could shout the loudest from the church steps, Lena Petrov learned to fold her voice small, until the night the mill caught fire, the bridge groaned, and a freight train full of kerosene thundered toward a sleeping valley. There was only one way to stop it: a brand new wire that could carry a human voice. The men who banned her from speaking didn't know how to use it. She did. If stories of courage under injustice matter to you, subscribe and like. This channel keeps voices like Lena's alive. In the spring of 1876, the river made a black ribbon across Millers Ferry, and the town made a habit of pretending it was bigger than it was. Folks painted their shop signs twice a year and argued 3 times as much. They argued at the mercantile, at the feed store, at the steps of St. Bartholomew's, anywhere the afternoon sun could find a face to redden. On those steps, the town council liked to set up a barrel as a podium. Whoever climbed the barrel became a law for 5 minutes. Lena Petrov never climbed the barrel. She stood in the shade, fingers on the strap of a worn satchel, the brass buckle warm against her palm. Her father had brought her to Missouri from a port she still dreamed in. Gray ships, gulls like torn paper, salt in her hair. When he died of the fever last winter, the town ladies sent broth and polite grief, and then went back to saying Lena should mind her place. A girl with a foreign name who read too fast and asked questions with a voice that carried. That voice had been a blessing in the schoolroom. She could read scripture so even the most restless boy would look up, surprised by the way syllables could shine. But outside those walls it turned heavy, suspicious. "Slow down," the butcher's wife told her. "You sound like you're calling a storm." The councilmen smiled when they said it was not proper for a young woman to address a meeting. They smiled wider when she mispronounced treasurer and made it sound like treasure. Only one person in town liked the way she spoke: Mr. Isaiah Whitcomb, a tinkerer who wore spectacles thick as coins. He rented a lean-to behind the post office and filled it with oddments: the broken jaw of a printing press, a brass horn that claimed it could make whispers louder, coils of bright copper wire. On the day this story begins, Lena brought him a sack of nails for the school's loose floorboards and found him hunched over something strung between 2 chairs. A length of wire, a cedar box, a round, black mouthpiece like a small cannon. "Bell's contraption," he said without turning. "Telephone, a talking wire." "Tele." Lena rolled it on her tongue, careful. "A wire that speaks?" "Carries speech," he corrected. "If it works." He lifted the mouthpiece to her. "Say something." "What should I say?" "Say what you're never allowed to say on the church steps." Lena smiled despite herself. She leaned in, the timbre of her voice steady and soft. "Gentlemen of the council," she began, "if you would hear a teacher who has scrubbed your son's chalk from her skirts, I have numbers to show you." Her words vanished down the black circle. Nothing came back. "Maybe it doesn't," she started. Then, from a second cedar box on the far chair, her voice returned to her like rain on a tin roof. Smaller, tinny, but hers. "Have numbers to show you." She laughed out loud, the sound bright as a match. Mr. Whitcomb pressed his lips together to hide his grin. "Your voice is clean as a bell," he said. "Carries well. The wire likes it." That week, Mr. Whitcomb persuaded the station master to let him string a trial line from the post office to the rail depot, a half-mile of wire stapled to poles sagging over alleys and orchards. It made the gossip fly faster than any telegraph. Women craning out windows to ask if men in Boston could now hear them peel apples. "Not Boston," Mr. Whitcomb said patiently. "Just the depot." The council granted him permission, with the weary condescension of men humoring a hobby. But when Lena petitioned to demonstrate the telephone at the next town meeting, so our wives and widows may use it in an emergency, the answer came with an easy laugh. "Millers Ferry was built by men's hands," Councilman Dugan said, patting the barrel, "and it will be governed by men's voices." Lena folded her petition in half, then in quarters, feeling the paper stiffen against her skin. "If the wire can carry a voice, it should carry the quickest one," she said. Dugan tilted his head. "And that would be you?" She thought of how the schoolhouse always quieted when she read, of boys who went home repeating lines they couldn't stop hearing. "It would be anyone trained to be clear," she answered. "I would train anyone." "Not tonight," Dugan said. "Not from the barrel. Leave the talking to the telegraph." Telegraph meant men. Telegraph meant code and clipped wrists and a language that didn't sound like breath. Lena walked home along the river, the telephone demonstration postponed, past the new mill whose tall windows glowed with late work. The mill had come like a promise. Jobs, sawdusty bread, the thrill of machinery. It smelled of pine and ambition, and tonight something sharp that made her think of lightning trapped indoors. At the schoolhouse door, the superintendent stood awkwardly in the dark. "Miss Petrov," he said, pressing a packet into her hands. "Readers for the second term. And, he cleared his throat. Some of the parents have concerns. They think you speak too much." "In class?" she asked, puzzled. "In general," he said, as if the words were a splinter he had to pull. "They say a teacher should be modest. Keep to the book. No speeches about numbers and drains and, well, petitions." Lena lifted her chin. "The book teaches numbers. The town refuses to read them." He looked away. Best to be cautious. Caution was exactly what the river didn't have 2 nights later, when the wind came hard from the west, shouldering through the rows of pine stacked at the mill. A spark leapt, hungry and sure. By the time the watchman rang the iron triangle, the west wall was already a sheet of flame. Men ran with buckets that seemed to evaporate in their hands. Horses screamed. The fire loved the resin in those boards. It climbed like a thief who knew every rung. Someone shouted that a freight was due from Springfield. Midnight, heavy with kerosene for the new lamps. If it crossed the trestle while the mill burned, the draft would pull the fire straight across the river, into the lower streets. The bridge itself might catch. The valley would become a bowl of light too bright to ever forget. At the depot, the station master pounded uselessly at the telegraph key. The line south was down. Rain somewhere between here and the next town had eaten it. Men cursed. The watchman kept ringing, his arm a piston of fear. And in the lean-to behind the post office, the telephone sat on its wooden table, the wire humming with a quiet nobody believed in yet. There was exactly one person in town who had spent an afternoon learning how to speak into it, so words would travel true. The girl they had told to be silent. The girl with the carrying voice. The blaze ate sky. Orange light wavered on every pane of glass in Millers Ferry, and the mill's roof caved in with a sound like the world's throat tearing open. Sparks rode the wind toward the bridge. The station master shouted until his voice broke, but no answer came back on the silent telegraph. Men argued, tripping over one another with buckets and prayers. Someone yelled, "We'll have to send a rider south." But a horse would never outrun the freight. In the chaos, Lena ran. She didn't think about whether she had the right, whether she was permitted. She thought only of the wire stretched above the orchards, the little cedar box waiting like a throat that could still shout. She reached the lean-to, breath tearing at her ribs, and Mr. Whitcomb's spectacles caught firelight as he turned. "The line's up," he gasped, "but none of them know how to—" "I do," Lena said. Her voice, for the first time, sounded larger than her frame. She seized the mouthpiece. The room was thick with smoke from the mill's resin and the smell of burning pine. But she steadied her words the way she steadied children's recitations. "Depot, depot, do you hear me?" Her vowels rang clear down the wire. A tinny crackle answered. Then a man's startled bark. "Who is this? Who's speaking?" "This is Lena Petrov at the post office. The midnight freight must not cross the trestle. The mill is on fire. Stop the train before the bridge." Silence. 1 heartbeat long. Then frantic movement on the other end. Boots. Shouts. The distant scream of a whistle being wrenched too soon. Back at the mill, the crowd stilled as the great plume of steam rose above the valley. The train had stopped short of the bridge, brakes screaming into the night. Buckets slowed. Men turned, faces streaked with soot and disbelief, toward the lean-to where the girl they had told to stay silent held the wire like a lifeline. Councilman Dugan was among them, his coat ash-flecked, his pride in tatters. For the first time, he had no words to give her. And Lena, breathing hard, said the one thing that mattered. "Now do you hear me?" Dawn came pale and strange, its light cutting through smoke that still curled like a wounded animal over the river. The mill was a blackened husk, timber bones steaming in the chill. Horses stood trembling, their sides lathered, and men rubbed ash into their forearms, as if trying to erase the night. No one had slept, yet no one in Millers Ferry doubted who had saved the town. Word spread faster than the fire itself had. Children whispered it as they carried water from the well. Wives repeated it with trembling relief while sweeping cinders from their doorsteps. It was the girl, the schoolteacher, the foreign one. At the depot, the crewman from Springfield refused to leave without seeing her. "We would have been kindling," one said, still shaken, if not for the warning. Another pointed at the sagging line of wire stretching into town. First time I ever heard a woman's voice save a trainload of men. By mid-morning, the council gathered on the church steps, their faces drawn and solemn. Dugan tried to thunder over the crowd, but his voice cracked, and the people didn't hush as they once did. They turned instead when Lena climbed the steps, not onto the barrel, but beside it. She did not raise her hands. She simply stood, her school satchel still over one shoulder, ash smudging her cheek. "Lena Petrov," Dugan began, forcing a smile, "on behalf of Millers Ferry, we thank you for—" "No," she said quietly. Her voice traveled anyway, as it always did. The murmurs fell away. "Don't thank me with words. Let the telephone speak for itself. Let it be more than a curiosity behind the post office. Let every home, every farm, every station it can reach have the chance to use it when danger comes." Her words were measured, calm, but behind them lay the crack of burning wood, the scream of brakes, the memory of a valley almost lost. The people knew it. They had heard it in their sleep and in her warning. Mr. Whitcomb stepped forward, spectacles glinting. She's the only one who trained her voice to the wire. If you want this invention to live here, you need her. Not just her silence in a classroom, her sound. The council shifted uneasily. For years they had defined themselves by who controlled the barrel, the telegraph, the vote. To grant Lena authority meant admitting the world was changing, and that a girl with an accent could carry it. Dugan's lips pressed thin. "It is unusual," he muttered. "Unusual!" a widow in the crowd snapped. "But alive!" Her children clung to her skirt. "If that train had come through, we would have burned in our beds." You men argued while she spoke. "I'll take unusual." Applause rose, ragged but strong. First from the mothers, then the mill hands, then even the Springfield crew who had nearly died. It swelled until it drowned out the sputtering of the council. For the first time, Lena did not fold her voice away. She stood in it. Respect in Millers Ferry was never free. It came tangled with suspicion, especially when it landed on the shoulders of someone the town had already marked as different. By the week's end, the ashes of the mill still smoldered, but a new fire burned in the gossip halls. She embarrassed the council, some whispered at the bakery. She spoke like a preacher, muttered others at the feed store. What if she thinks her voice matters more than men's? Lena felt it first in the schoolhouse. Parents who once smiled now lingered at the door, eyes sharp. One father said his boy no longer needed to practice reading aloud. "Your lessons have made him too proud." Another claimed his daughter repeated Lena's words about numbers at the supper table as though they were gospel. It stung more than the ash still in her lungs. She wanted to believe saving the town would make space for her. Instead, the space grew narrower. Only Mr. Whitcomb and a handful of others stood firm. The widow who had spoken up on the steps brought Lena loaves of rye and said, "Let them grumble. They're alive to do so, thanks to you." The Springfield crew sent word that they had written her name into their company's log, an official commendation. But in Millers Ferry itself, the council bristled. At the next meeting, Dugan declared the telephone line would remain experimental, not official. He added pointedly, "Any future demonstrations will be overseen by men with proper training." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, remembering whose words had stopped the freight. But no one challenged him. Not yet. That night, Lena sat alone by the river. The black water carried the reflection of stars, scattered like white chalk on her students' slates. She thought of her father, who had believed America would mean fairness if only they worked hard enough. She whispered into the darkness, "What is the use of a voice if they will not let me keep it?" The river answered with silence, but the wire above her, sagging between poles, hummed faintly in the wind, as though it remembered her words, and fate was not done testing her. Because just as fire had forced the town to hear her once, another night, darker, more dangerous, was coming, when the very survival of Millers Ferry would depend again on the girl they had tried to silence. It began with rain, heavy, punishing rain that rattled roofs and swelled the river past its banks. By dusk, Millers Ferry was a town of lanterns, bobbing in windows, and boots splashing through mud. By midnight, the rain had not relented, and the river, already swollen with the runoff from the burned mill, pressed against the trestle bridge with the strength of a clenched fist. At the depot, the station master stared at timetables with dread. Another freight was due, iron and timber from Springfield, drawn by an engine that could not see the storm ahead. If the bridge failed beneath it, the valley would lose more than houses. The flood would take the lower town entire. The telegraph was still unreliable, the line choked with static from storm water. Men shouted to send a rider again, but the mud would swallow hooves before they made 10 miles. Time was shorter than any road, and once more all eyes, though unwilling, turned toward the sagging wire above the orchard. Lena was already at the lean-to, rain plastering her hair to her brow. Mr. Whitcomb fumbled with dry cloth, trying to keep the cedar box safe. His spectacles fogged, but his voice was clear. If the bridge goes, the valley goes. The train must stop. She gripped the mouthpiece, her knuckles white. The councilmen, Dugan among them, crowded the doorway, dripping with rain. One barked, "This is no place for a schoolteacher." But another, quieter, added, "She's the only one who knows how." Lena's pulse beat in her throat. For a moment she felt the weight of every insult, every dismissal. Then she pushed it aside. She leaned to the wire and let her voice ring like a bell cutting through the storm. "Depot, do you hear me? This is Millers Ferry. The bridge is failing. Stop the Springfield freight before the river takes it." Nothing. Only static and rain. She swallowed, steadied, tried again. This time she slowed, as she did with restless children who needed each word to land. "Listen, the bridge is breaking. Stop the train." A pause. Then a fractured voice crackled back through the storm. "We hear you. We're stopping." In the distance, through the downpour, a whistle screamed, not in triumph, but in warning. Metal shrieked against metal as brakes clamped. The sound echoed like a prayer across the valley. Moments later, with a groan that seemed to shake the ground itself, the trestle bridge gave way. The river swallowed timbers, lanterns, the last memory of the mill. But the freight had stopped short. Millers Ferry stood, battered but breathing. In the lean-to, the council stood speechless. Rain streaked their faces. Ash and mud streaked their coats. Lena lowered the mouthpiece, her arms trembling. She did not need to ask, "Now do you hear me?" The silence of the men answered enough. The girl they had tried to banish to silence had once again kept them alive. By morning, the river had shrunk back, leaving broken timbers and half-drowned wagons scattered like bones along the banks. The bridge was gone, the mill a ruin, yet the town itself stood, wet, shaken, alive. Children clutched their mothers' skirts. Men rubbed their forearms raw as if they could erase the memory of what almost was. And in every whispered retelling of the night, one name was constant: Lena. The council gathered in the church, heavy-eyed and brittle. Dugan tried to open with prayer, but his voice faltered. At last, he admitted what none of them wished to say aloud. Twice this town has been spared by the voice of one we forbade to speak. His words clattered to the floor, like coins no one wanted to pick up. Outside, the townsfolk waited. They filled the steps, the street, the muddy square, all of them damp and stubborn, unwilling to leave until something changed. Farmers who had lost their crops, mothers who had nearly lost their children, the Springfield crew who had nearly been buried alive, all stood shoulder to shoulder. Lena arrived late, satchel slung over her shoulder, her dress still streaked with soot and river mud. She did not climb the barrel. She did not need to. When she began to speak, even through the cracked door of the church, her words carried. "You built this town on voices," she said, calm but unyielding. on meetings, on arguments, on who could shout the loudest. But when it mattered most, your shouting could not stop fire or flood. Only clarity did. Only truth carried on the wire. She turned to the people. If we are to survive what comes next, whether flood, flame, or hunger, we need every voice. We need women's voices, children's voices, the foreign voices you've taught yourselves to ignore. We need to train them, not silence them. Otherwise, Millers Ferry will fall the next time the river rises. The square was silent, but for the drip of rain from eaves. Then the widow who had spoken once before raised her chin and called out, "She speaks for me." Another voice followed, then another. Soon the square was a chorus. "She speaks for me. She speaks for me." Dugan sagged under the weight of it. Even he could not outshout a town united. That evening the council voted, reluctantly, officially, to make the telephone line a permanent part of Millers Ferry's lifeline. They appointed Whitcomb to expand it, and Lena to train operators. For the first time her name appeared in the council record, not as a nuisance, but as necessary. Years passed, and Millers Ferry changed. New bridges rose where the old had fallen, stronger and higher. The charred skeleton of the mill was replaced by a newer structure, humming with modern gears. And strung above it all, like a net catching voices before they fell into silence, ran the copper wires Lena had once steadied with her own hands. Every child in the schoolhouse now learned not just to read from the book, but to speak into the mouthpiece. Lena trained them to keep words sharp, steady, alive. A voice, she told them, is not noise. It is a signal. It can carry across storms if you let it. Farmers' wives called the depot to order flour before the river rose. Miners' families in the hills warned the town when shafts collapsed. And every time, the council was forced to remember who had made this possible. Travelers began to carry the story beyond Millers Ferry. A Springfield conductor told it in taverns down the line, how a young woman's words had stopped a freight. A newspaperman from St. Louis arrived, scribbling notes, marveling that, in a backwater town, a schoolteacher of foreign birth became the voice of survival. By the 1880s, the name Lena Petrov was being spoken, in places she had never seen. Dugan never quite forgave her, though he lived long enough to be forced to call her Madam Operator in council records. But time made his bitterness irrelevant. The children Lena trained grew up believing a woman's voice could save lives. They carried that belief into their marriages, their churches, their businesses. The square never looked the same again. Barrel or not, silence no longer held power. And Lena herself? She never sought monuments. She walked to school each morning with the same satchel on her shoulder, brass buckle shining in the sun. But when the telephone rang anywhere in Millers Ferry, people still paused, listening not only for the message but for the echo of the night, when silence would have meant death, until a girl with an accent filled the wire with courage. Some stories are about battles fought with fists. This one was about a battle fought with breath. Lena's voice, once mocked, once forbidden, became the thread that tied a town together. It teaches us that dignity is not granted by councils or barrels or titles. It is carried in the clarity of truth, spoken even when told to be silent. If stories like this move you, stories of courage against injustice, subscribe and like this channel. Because sometimes the past doesn't just whisper, it shouts, if only we are willing to listen.